there are many myths about Jesus. In these programs, we're talking to some experts who can help us get at the facts behind the myths. One myth is that we don't know what the people who wrote the Bible's accounts of Jesus actually said. Their documents have been changed as they were copied by hand again and again, before printing was invented. So how does the evidence for the documents in the Bible compare with the evidence for other ancient documents?
When you think about the comparison in terms of the number of copies we have for the Gospels versus other ancient documents, I can say in general that the copies we have of the Gospels are far, far more numerous than any other thing we have in the Greco-Roman world, including Homer, which comes in a distant second. And I'm splitting that between the Odyssey and the Iliad. We have, as I've mentioned, about 5,800 manuscripts in Greek of the New Testament. Most of those are going to have Gospels or part of the Gospels in them. Then we have other ancient translations of the New Testament, beginning with Latin in the 2nd century. We have about 10,000 copies of Latin. Again, most of those are of the Gospels, and then they'll have other portions as well. We have Coptic, Syriac, Georgian, Gothic, Old Church Slavonic, Armenian, Arabic, Aramaic, numerous languages, and those languages, not counting the Latin, come to at least 5,000, probably more than 10,000 copies. So when you gather all this material together, for the whole New Testament or portions of the New Testament, we've got at least 20,000 copies of the New Testament in some form of these ancient languages. If you were to wipe all those out, and you had a magic wand, you could just destroy all of them in one fell swoop, we'd still be able to reproduce virtually the entire New Testament just from the writings of the church fathers alone, because they commented on the New Testament and they did not have the gift of brevity. And so these church fathers, we have over 1 million quotations of the church fathers from the New Testament. Once again, the Gospels are the primary things that they quote from. Now, let's compare that to just the average classical author. The average classical Greek or Latin author has fewer than 20 copies of his writings still in existence. Far fewer typically, sometimes 1 or 2. Sometimes we have such massive gaps that somebody will mention, I've written these 35 books and we only have 18 of them or only 4 of them left in existence. Sometimes we're waiting 1,000 years before we see our earliest copy. But let's say the average classical author has 20 copies, to be on the very generous side. You stack those up, they'll be about 4 feet high. Stack up the New Testament manuscripts in the various languages, not counting the patristic quotations, and the stack would be more than 1 mile high. So the comparison, there is no comparison. It's just a massive disparity. What you're dealing with classical literature is a dearth of evidence. What you're dealing with the New Testament is an embarrassment of riches.
The question of whether we can be confident that we have reconstructed documents extremely close to the originals that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John would have originally produced is another place where there's a lot of misinformation in society. Textual critics of all or no theological perspectives agree that with all the New Testament documents, and particularly with the Gospels, we can go back with a high degree of confidence to documents as early as the 2nd century, which may well have been copied directly from the manuscripts that were the first editions, if you like, of the 4 Gospels. And that as these texts emerge, we have larger and larger fragments preserved until as we move into the 3rd century, we have nearly complete Gospels, and in the 4th and 5th centuries, nearly complete New Testaments. These represent amounts of evidence for which no other document or collection of documents anywhere in the ancient world enjoys. It's a luxury of evidence. And so while none of this proves that what the gospel writers were saying was necessarily all true, it certainly is more than adequate to show we know what their original claims were.
The myth is that we don't know what the people who wrote the Bible's accounts of Jesus actually said. The fact is there's far more evidence for these accounts than for any other ancient documents. We can be confident that we know what the authors originally said. Next time, we'll ask whether differences between the copies undermine what we can know about Jesus.